Wearing PPE at all times. Changi Airport announces stricter measures to protect workers in the highest risk zone.
A locally developed breath test that can detect COVID-19 in 60 seconds is ready for trials.
And the woman from this viral video appears in court on another charge.
Welcome to The Big Story, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Olivia Quay.
And I'm Haryanto Dimana. You can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode.
24 new COVID-19 community cases were confirmed today. 2 are currently unlinked.
The other 22 are connected to previous cases, with 12 detected while in quarantine and 10 identified through surveillance.
Meanwhile, 12 imported cases were also reported today, including 5 returning Singaporeans or PRs. More details will be released later tonight.
With Singapore's largest active cluster still growing at Changi Airport, its 14,000 workers will be segregated into 3 risk-based zones.
These new measures are being introduced progressively and will be fully in place when Terminals 1 and 3 as well as Jewel reopen to the public on June the 13th.
4,400 workers will be in Zone 1, the highest risk zone. There will be strict measures there to protect them from COVID-19 as well as isolate them from other staff and the public.
Now, Zone 1 comprises the terminal piers, arrival immigration hall and baggage claim areas. Airport workers deployed there will have to don PPE plus a face mask and face shield. They'll also have to keep within their zone at all times and use designated dining and rest areas and toilets.
The next higher risk area is Zone 2, where workers must wear a mask, shield and gloves. Public meeting areas in the airport will be considered Zone 3, the lowest risk. Workers only need to wear a mask there.
We now know clearly where the primary zone of infection emanated from. So together with our airport partners, we are working to reinvent our operational processes and operating model so that we can enhance the safety protocol by June 13, so that we can decisively segment and ring-fence the entire zone serving our arrival passengers. And in so doing, we'll safeguard the safety of our airport workers as well as the rest of Singapore.
Journalist Kok Ifeng was at Changi Airport earlier today and he saw the tighter measures firsthand. Ifeng, what were the main differences you observed in the new stepped-up measures versus what was in place before?
I think what Changi Airport is doing is quite a fundamental change in their operating process. So previously, the airport's transit area was quite a contiguous area. So there was no strict separation between the various parts of the transit area. What Changi Airport is doing now is to create 3 separate, distinct, segregated zones for workers, so that workers within each zone do not intermingle with each other. So these zones are sort of risk-based. The lowest risk zone is Zone 3, and that's the public area. So for example, the meeting area, the arrival or departure halls. So places outside of immigration. The second zone is the immigration area, as well as the central transit area where you enter. From the departure immigration, you walk to the big hall. The area is the central transit area where there's all the shops and everything. That's Zone 2, which is what they're saying is it's slightly. There's not much difference between Zone 2 and Zone 3 because you're just entering from Singapore. So the risk of you carrying COVID is about the same as you being outside of Zone 2. So those are the 2 sort of safer zones. Zone 1 is the highest. So this is places where workers, this is for example, the arrival and departure gates where passengers come through, as well as the arrival immigration hall, as well as the arrival baggage claims hall. So what Changi Airport is doing is basically to sort of ring fence their workers even further, so as to prevent cross-nation between different groups of workers. And I think the most interesting thing about this is that what they're doing is basically doing a very conservative and prudent approach, because what they're saying is that previously what they assumed was that lower risk travelers from countries with lower risk of COVID-19 having transient contact with each other is not very high risk. But given the infectiousness of the new B1617 variant, I think they're taking a very cautious approach and trying to make sure that even transient contact is seen as risky and needs to be protected against. So I think that's the biggest change that Changi Airport is doing. Also, they're stepping up testing regimes for their workers. So for the highest risk workers working in Zone 1, instead of being tested every 14 days, they're being tested every 7 days. So this is the PCR test of the swab. On top of that, every third day of the testing cycle, they will be subject to a rapid antigen test, which is another test on top of that. And Changi Airport is saying that in the future, they'll institute a daily testing regime, a non-invasive test. For example, possibly could be a breathalyzer test, for example, where workers are tested every day at the end of the shift. So when they go home, they know whether or not they have had contracted the virus, and if they are not negative, they have some sort of peace of mind when they go home. So I think that's the biggest changes that the airport is putting in place starting from June 13.
Right. Well, so segregated zones, increased testing, that's all great to hear. But we understand CAG said the terminals will also have cleaner air. So Yufeng, can you tell us more about that?
Yes. So in response to recent reports regarding the possible spreading of the COVID-19 virus via airborne transmission, I think what Changi Airport is recognizing is that in places with prolonged contact, without masks, with poor ventilation, those are places where there's a high risk of workers contracting or people contracting the virus. So therefore, they already have put in place certain measures to increase the frequency of air recycling in, for example, toilets or in other places of the airport. But to make it even more enhanced, what they're doing is they're putting in portable high efficiency particulate air filters or HEPA filters in these areas, for example, like staff rest areas or places where passengers might congregate, so as to further filter out the air and sort of try and prevent possibility of airborne transmission of the virus. Yeah.
It seems like today's measures only affect airport workers. Yifeng, is there anything in place for passengers or visitors to the terminals and even the shopping centre Jewel?
Okay, so I think right now the measures are meant to protect workers because, as you know, the cluster of more than 100 cases that are linked to the airport emerged after some workers had contracted the virus, while interacting with arriving passengers. So I think what Changi Airport is saying is that actually currently there are already strict measures in place to ensure that passengers arriving from high-risk areas are already segregated from the general traveling passenger population. So when they come to the airport, they're immediately escorted to the testing center at the airport. They wait there to get a test result, and then they're immediately taken to their quarantine facility via dedicated transport. So already there are measures in place to ensure that there's no cross-contamination between high-risk travelers versus low-risk travelers. So right now, and even now, with low-risk travelers, they're not allowed to linger around the transit area or to hang around for too long. So I think what this is doing is not really I think there's not much change to passengers, but more helping to protect workers who are interacting with these passengers. But I will say that there's one added precaution that they're putting in, which is for countries that are very high risk. I mean, Changi Airport didn't really say what was the definition of very high risk, but from these countries, passengers of these countries will have to land at a separate gate. It's called a remote gate at Terminal 2, which is currently closed for renovation, but they're opening up several gates in that terminal to handle these super high risk or very high risk passengers. So these passengers will go to the gate, clear immigration at the gate, and then be transported from the gate to their quarantine facility. So they'll never pass through any of the terminals that are operating right now. So I think this is one of the measures that they're putting in place for passengers to ensure that there's even greater segregation between high risk and very high risk passengers from their workers. Basically, that's what they're doing. Yeah. As for Jewel, my understanding is that because the airport as well as the mall, is being closed until June 13th, which is the end of the heightened alert period. Changi Airport is offering rental waivers for their tenants. And I think they're also looking at possibly providing some support for workers at the airport as well, because they're going through quite a tough time right now. So I think those announcements will come out maybe later, in the next coming weeks or months.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Yufeng. That was Kok Yufeng, journalist for the Straits Times. And from Changi Airport to Tuas Checkpoint, where a breath test that can accurately detect COVID-19 within a minute will soon be trialled. It will screen incoming travellers and be carried out alongside the current compulsory antigen rapid test. Those screened positive on the breathalyzer will need to take a confirmatory PCR swab test. Developed by a spin-off from the National University of Singapore, the breath test has been provisionally authorised by the Health Sciences Authority after undergoing clinical trials.
Now, the woman seen in this viral clip refusing to wear a mask at MBS is contesting a charge for an alleged offence last year under the COVID-19 Temporary Measures Act. Appearing in court today, she was seen approaching the State Courts building without a mask on, only putting one on when she was near the entrance. She also tried to remove her mask before addressing the court, but the judge ordered her to keep it on throughout the proceedings.
It's been just over a week since we haven't been allowed to dine in at F&B premises. Haryanto, how has this affected your plans to eat out?
It has definitely, because I've had plans to eat out with my friends, but now we can't do that. And we had actually wanted to eat at a friend's place because it just opened, a restaurant. But then, now everything has gone to takeaway. It's quite saddening because, it goes without saying that F&B is among the worst hit sectors. And even when businesses were able to pivot quickly, having learned from last year's circuit breaker, business is not as brisk.
Well, that's for sure. Our colleague Anjali Raghuraman spoke to several restaurant owners. She joins us now to share more. So Anjali, according to the business owners whom you spoke to, how different is it for them to pivot their business this time around, given that, they've been through this before?
Yeah, definitely. This time around, it was slightly easier to, get their delivery and takeaway models up and running because they already have had a bit of experience doing it during the circuit breaker last year. But the issue this time around mainly was the fact that they only had 1.5 days essentially to do it. And the announcement that phase 2 heightened alert was coming into play came out on a Friday, and most suppliers are closed on Saturday. So a lot of them had to scramble for not only packaging, takeaway packaging and food stocks to last the week, and then also have to pivot their menus to a takeaway friendly model. Yeah, there were definitely a bunch of challenges the moment the announcement came out.
The two main profiles in your story are owners who opened second businesses barely 2 weeks ago. Anjali, did they say why they decided to start new ventures, especially in these volatile times?
Yeah, it's a two very different cases, but yeah, the stories are quite parallel. So in the case of Asador, the owners also run next door Spanish cafe in Siglap, and they opened just slightly before the circuit breaker last year and went through the most challenging times, but they came out of it and they built their core audience very strongly. And then they decided that, we have a captive audience in Singapore, let's take advantage of it. So that's why they sped up, moved along with opening Asador in another Spanish restaurant in Joo Chiat, and they opened like we mentioned 2 weeks ago, and now they are back under lockdown conditions. As for Low Tide, which is run by the same people behind Sego House, which is a dive bar in Chinatown, it was a case of the location becoming available. Low Tide is located at the corner of Club Street, in where this French restaurant Beaujolais used to be. They just wanted to again sort of take advantage of the situation, but also build on their brand and expand to a whole new audience in the Club Street area. But then again, the pandemic came in. I mean, not the pandemic restrictions came in, and 2 weeks in, they barely had time to get their name out, but already they're facing massive challenges trying to get the people not only on board with what they're doing for takeaway and delivery, but also just getting the name out.
Right. Well, maybe a bit of a silver lining of sorts, because under the job support scheme, F&B businesses, they get increased wage subsidies of 50%. But aside from that, and of course in short of a lifting of restrictions, what actions are these businesses calling for?
Okay, so the main issue a lot of them have is their fixed costs. So stuff like rental, especially. Rental is a huge burden on a lot of these restaurants, and so a lot of them are hoping for rental reliefs, because on top of that, they have to look after overheads, they have to look after labor, they have to look after utilities, because the restaurants are still open and running and they cost money to keep open. But if they could get help besides the JSS support, which is like you mentioned, 50%, the rental reliefs and understanding from landlords is what a lot of them are seeking at the moment.
Now, I've seen ground-up efforts on social media encouraging people to keep buying from hawkers, especially the older ones, to help them tide over this period. Anjali, what are the hawkers saying? How can they survive?
Okay, among the hawkers, the ones that are the worst affected are the elderly ones and who don't have access necessarily to, a marketing team, a social media presence, or even some of them don't even know how to get on delivery platforms. So there have been a lot of ground-up efforts, like on Instagram pages, even Facebook pages, where people are consolidating, like their favorite hawker stalls run by elderly people. Even KFC is doing his like Singapore tour of some of his favorite hawker stalls. So it's going to be an uphill climb. I mean, there are going to be people who fall through the cracks for sure, but it's quite encouraging to see how people are rallying behind them.
Well, thank you, Anjali. We've been speaking with journalists for the Straits Times, Anjali Raghuraman.
Taking a quick look at what else is making headlines, in a Facebook post today, Education Minister Chan Chun Sing said Singapore's autonomous universities will be able to admit more students this year, but that doesn't mean admissions will be made easier. Last year, the Education Ministry said the 6 autonomous universities would make about 2,000 more offers, and in January this year, former Education Minister Lawrence Wong revealed that about 1,000 extra places were given out across these unis, with some places going to students who had planned to study overseas or those who opted to study instead of joining a weak job market.
McDonald's celebrity meal launch with K-pop boy band BTS has been delayed to June 21st amid a spike in local cases. The BTS meal was scheduled to be sold here from Thursday. During last year's Phase 2 reopening, the authorities had discouraged F&B establishments from providing special discounts for at least 2 weeks to prevent the potential to attract crowds.
In world news, COVID-19 restrictions in Israel will end after its successful vaccine rollout has nearly stamped out local infections. It reported just 12 new cases on Saturday, down from a daily peak of more than 10,000 in January. There will still be curbs on higher risk activities and limits on how many people can gather in a specific area, and its borders will remain closed to most incoming travelers.
Western countries are outraged at the forced diversion of a passenger plane carrying a Belarusian opposition journalist.
EU leaders are due to discuss their response to what the bloc's executive called a hijacking, while the US State Department described it as a shocking act. Here's more.
A passenger plane operated by Ryanair flying from Athens to Lithuania on Sunday was abruptly diverted in Belarusian airspace after Minsk scrambled a MiG fighter jet and forced the airliner to land. On the ground, authorities detained one of the passengers, Belarusian journalist Roman Protasevich. Seen here in a 2017 photo, 26-year-old Protasevich worked for an online news service called Nexta that broadcast images of mass protests against Belarus's President Alexander Lukashenko. Protasevich fled Belarus after he was accused of organizing mass riots and inciting social hatred, allegations he denies. Belarusian news agency Belta reported that Lukashenko had personally ordered the warplane to escort the Ryanair plane to Minsk. The commander of Belarus's air defenses said the flight was diverted because of a report of a bomb on board. Opposition leader Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya called on international aviation authorities to investigate what she described as a hijacking.
Today, Lukashenko personally caused an international scandal, used military aircraft against civilians of Belarus and European countries to reprise a single person. No one else is safe. Anyone can be in Roman Protasevich's place.
Supporters of Protasevich descended on the Minsk airport. A spokesperson for Ryanair said the flight was directed to land, passengers disembarked, and the plane checked. It was later permitted to continue flying to Vilnius. The incident immediately prompted outcry from across the European Union, including from the leaders of Lithuania, Greece, Poland, and others. Western allies have repeatedly admonished Lukashenko, who has clung to power in Belarus since the mid-1990s. He was accused of rigging the last election and cracking down violently on civilian protesters.
Well, those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Quay. Join us tomorrow for more stories on A Big Story.